Hands
His ankle there,
Nathan,
nice,
big
nice
left
kick.
Here comes Jordan,
Jordan come back with those hands again.
Welcome back, everyone, to Combat Chat Podcast. From where you're listening, it's probably been a week. For me, it's been like half a day because I've been on a busy podcasting schedule. Back here in the home office once again. This is episode 221, I believe, of the Combat Chat Podcast. We are absolutely flying in 2023. Once again, just me on hosting duties, but once again, also an absolutely powerful guest from the Sunshine State. Joining me again, repeat visitor to Combat Chat Podcast. How are you, Nakia Wright?
Good. How are you?
I am very well, thank you. Before we get going, can we have a little bit of insight into where you are recording from today? Because that is not a background for Zoom. That's real life.
Yeah, so decided, speaking of which, is about 5 bearded dragons. No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, we're up to 6 now. So I came into town, quiet area, good internet, and discovered that I'm sitting under near a tree that is got about 200 bats hanging from it. And I'm surrounded by between 6 and 10 bearded dragons. So apparently I'm in a zoo, and it should make for an interesting time.
Hopefully we get a bearded dragon appearance at some stage over the course
They're
of
really
recording.
confident. I might be able to grab one, actually. Yeah, I'll probably just leave it alone.
We'll put that in like the bonus. The bonus content is Nakia wrangling a bearded dragon.
Yeah.
So we've had yourself and Benji on the show before, got a little bit of your background in the sport. If you're listening to this and you haven't heard that, maybe that's a little bit of prerequisite viewing just to get up to speed. But talk to me about what's been happening, what's going on with the gym. Have you been a little bit quiet over the holiday season, had a bit of a rest? What's new in your world?
Wasn't as quiet as I'd like it to be. Managed to get about 10 days off, and I actually relaxed for about 3 of them as usual. But yeah, like the gym's good. The gym was always quiet in December. I feel like December is just a bit of a punishment for gym owners because everyone suspends and cancels and just decides what they're doing. But usually we expect to pick up in February, but it's actually 2 weeks into the year. And we're just getting absolutely smashed, so it's good. People are back into it quickly. So yeah, the gym is pumping, and it's all happening.
Good to hear. So pretty fast start to the year for yourselves.
Yep.
Speaking of which, and we will get right into that, the last time we spoke, you were doing this little side project, just something in your free time, starting to grow a little Muay Thai promotion, just as an added extra. But how long has it been? When was the first Muay Thai League? Not long ago.
June 2020, 2020, maybe. Yeah. So we're just it's been over a year. So yeah, about a year and a half. Yeah.
About 18 months into MTL. Yeah. But in that time, I feel even you guys you started off, I guess from my perspective, it was going to be a little Muay Thai show / brand, just kind of like a sort of broad brush kind of Muay Thai outfit, but you've really kind of stripped away some of the extras and doubled down on growing what is quite a large scale production. So what's happened in Muay Thai League since we last spoke? Has your perspective, your aim with the show changed, or is it just you started a little bit of momentum, started to build and you went like that?
Yeah, it's funny how it happened. Like we started thinking we'll run a 80% amateur show with like 1 or 2 main events, so a couple of pro fights at the top end. Like our first card was Daniel Marshall as Billy, and then I think we had Nicole fighting as a semi-main, I think. So we had 2 pro fights, but the rest was amateur, and that was the format we planned to stick with. And I should have known better because it's pretty typical of me that I don't just half do things.
I have noticed that, yeah.
So yeah, it was not expected, it was not planned, but it sort of organically show by show grew. The people that we started off with, like the top end sort of amateurs, they started to turn pro. especially with our own boys. Like initially we thought, great, this is a home show where we can put a bunch of our own fighters on and really have a good time. And then they started to turn pro, so naturally it moved along with them as well. And but yeah, it really was initially just like, it wasn't a plan to make a real big brand out of it or anything huge, but it just sort of started to move that way. And now we reassess what we want to do with it, and have realized that we want to sort of make a real go of it.
That's an interesting kind of verbiage, I suppose. You want to have a real go of it. So is this, where do you see yourselves taking Muay Thai League? Is that, do you feel like there's you're really kind of creating a different kind of show? Like in becoming a promoter, did you feel like there was a gap in Australia or maybe in Queensland to kind of address? How do you go about sort of expanding Muay Thai League, and where can you take it, you feel?
Yeah, definitely. A couple of things, like the initial gap that I could see when we first started was a really well-tuned, organized show. And that's not saying that other people don't run good shows or can't be organized, but like, yeah, my level of organization is probably a little bit next level, a bit OCD. But I had taken notes throughout my fight career of things that I really loved about shows and things that I didn't like. And at the end of the day, where fighters aren't making so much money, that those little things don't matter, because you're just doing it because you love it so much and you're not really making a bunch of money. That for me, I always noticed, like, I wanted to go back and fight on particular shows that experience was good, the memory was good, like I had a good time. My friends wanted to come watch because the whole show was good, not just come watch because I was fighting. So the gap initially was just like, let's run a really well organized show, make sure we treat the fighters really well, make sure that like they feel like everything was organized for them, and they were looked after and they didn't have to think too much. They just had to focus on their fight. And so that was the initial gap. And then as it evolved, that's still one of our like main focuses as well. Like it's really high on our sort of values list, is to look after the fighters. But as it's evolved as well, one thing I've noticed is like the gap in just bringing attention as well. It's like the world of social media is so handy now for business, and these fighters are so underrated and underexposed. And that's one of our things that we're trying to really like just focus a lot of energy into, like, how can we get more attention to Muay Thai, more attention to our show, and more attention to like the athletes that are on our show.
Yeah, and it's one thing I hear a lot. I've not been up to a Muay Thai League yet, but I've been keeping up with a lot of kind of like, chatting to fighters who are on the show, and a couple of them were guests on, a couple of fighters who have come and fought in the show have been guests on, like the Female Fight Experience, for example, and they all kind of seem to say the same thing, that like this was a step up from other shows in terms of how you looked after and the kind of just overall production. And it's a great point you make, is you do yourself a lot of favors as a promoter if you're the show that a fighter goes, wow, I really want to come back and fight on that. Like, I think in my experience, it was very much like the first time I went and fought on Rebellion, I was like, you guys have been down you've been down for Rebellion, of course, as well. And it's kind of like, oh, this is like real sports. Like, this isn't like Muay Thai is like, it's like, that's, I feel in a lot of ways, the bridge to gap is, and it's something that people kind of like about Muay Thai in its own way too, in that it is quite like low key and casual. But when you go to that show, it's like, you feel like you're a professional athlete, which is what, like, regardless of the smaller returns, Thai boxers are still professional athletes. And you go home and you really feel like you had that win, lose, draw, whatever happens, you still kind of felt like you got that bit of treatment. And like, it does a lot to say to the fighters, like, I'm appreciate that you're here, and I'm going to take care of you and let you kind of do your job. Is that sort of like the frame of mind that you take?
Yeah, definitely. Rebellion was definitely one. I was fortunate enough to fight on it as a last minute, got real lucky, took it on a week's notice kind of thing. And that was always one that stood out in my mind, just the treatment and professionalism of the show. And one of our boys went on it recently, and the same thing like that. Obviously it's been a few years since I was on it, so Benj was telling me that it was like next level again, you know, just the way that everything was handled. And so that was one that definitely stood out to me as like the example of what we should be aiming for. And yeah, like the fighters are putting themselves on the line to entertain the crowd, you know, and without them we're nothing. Without them there's no shows, and like without them especially there's no good shows. Like we could have really backyard scrappy fight shows, you know, and no one really cared. But if we want that high level, we want to be able to like build Australian fighters to get to a point where they can go and make a scene internationally, then we need to have like that level of event, and we need to look after them, because you know there's, especially in Queensland, there's like a show almost every weekend. Sometimes what might make you stand out versus the other show is just how they get treated, and if the money is the same and potential opponents are probably similar, then ultimately who they decide to choose to what show they go on is probably going to come down to how are they treated and what the experience is like on the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And to a point you mentioned earlier, it's that idea of kind of like it is a sport, Thai boxing generally, that's in need of some exposure, and there's that kind of constant tug of war between like whose job is it to get bums in seats for these shows? Is it the fighter's job as kind of like the athlete that's trying to grow their profile, or is it the promoter's job as the person who's promoting the show? And it's a balance, of course. Like fighters need to treat in my opinion, fighters need to treat selling tickets and live streams like a part of the job, or, you know, really fighting is what you like to do. The job is the job in a lot of ways. But where I feel it becomes a bit of a tug of war is, yes, it's the fighter's job to promote their fight, but are they being given a platform? And that where it's like, you mentioned kind of like the social media and the overall branding, like the fighter can there's, as you say, there's lots of shows on, and a lot of the time fighters are quite busy. Like there might be 6, 7, 8 fights for them in a year, and to kind of, it's difficult to make a compelling case to sell a bunch of tickets every single time you fight. That, you know, when you're on your Instagram or your social media, or you've got a network through your day job that you can potentially sell tickets to, it's like, is the brand of the show something that is appealing to come and watch? And that's something that, as I kind of move through my professional career, I find is a consideration. Like, for example, if you're trying to sell tickets, you know, like I work in, you know, my 9 to 5 is very corporate, but it's like, if I'm like, hey, everyone, come and get some tickets and watch me fight, and it's something really dingy with very little promotion at kind of a suspect venue, you're not really going to get that kind of buy-in. Like, I have to be thinking, as someone who wants to elevate my own brand, which promotions are kind of on the same wavelength as me and giving me something that feels kind of professional.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's definitely levels to a game. I think when you starting at a really low pressure show, just simple, like that's great. Like you don't necessarily want to throw first time fighters into like all the big flashy venues and big flashy lights. But when you are at a level that's professional and you do like ticket selling and all of that stuff becomes really important, because, you know, the expenses of the show are much higher. Like you said, it's definitely a balance. I take it upon myself to do as much promotion as I can as the promoter. I think of it as it's my responsibility to sell tickets and to fill the venue. But also as a fighter, yeah, like the more they can treat themselves like a business, the more opportunities they're going to get, because at the end of the day, if you do sell tickets and you put on a show and you can perform Muay Thai well, then that's going to repay you. But yeah, like I know for myself, like even just sales psychology in itself, like if you're selling a product that you believe in, it's much easier to sell, because you're like, yep, come along. Like, for example, your gym, come along to my gym. I know it's really family friendly. I know it's this, I know it's that. I know they're going to look after you. You feel confident. If you're selling a, you know, $70 fight show ticket, and you know they're going to rock up and it's in a really shitty venue and no one, like it's just disorganized and the fights are late and there's heaps of gaps between fights because no one knows what they're doing and it's like stuff's going wrong, you're going to have a hard time being like, yeah, it's a really good show, please come to it, because in like the back of your mind, you know, it's not the premium. Whereas, if you're selling tickets, and usually the ticket price point's fairly similar across the board, at least it is in Queensland, like maybe $10 here or there. But if you're selling one, you can say to those people, like, you're guaranteed a good night. It's a really, like, if you're getting a VIP ticket, the food's really great. You can, you can drink, you can have a good time. The seats are great. You can see from everywhere. The fights are always good quality. The show runs really smoothly. You're not there till like 1 a.m. If you can confidently sell a ticket with all of those things in place, then it just makes sense. People are going to push more for their friends and family to come to that particular event.
Absolutely. And that's something that I think is an incorrect, or in the past, I do think it's changing, because as there is so many kind of like prestige shows in Australia now that like you kind of can't get away with some of the things that you used to be able to get away with. And it was an issue we had in New South Wales for a long time, was like the whole ticket selling kind of mentality to the fights was like, especially in New South Wales, it was like put on a ton of amateur fights because they're low expense, and then just rely on those individual fighters to sell tickets on the basis of, I am fighting and you are my friend, so you should come and watch. And what is often overlooked is that that's a very, very short-term strategy, because people will not buy a ticket again if they were just coming in a very transactional way to just kind of support their mate. What we're trying to do as a sport is get more notoriety, get bigger, and really you're selling tickets as like, there's the same kind of inner circle of people are going to go to every fight show. You're not selling tickets to the people who are fans of Thai boxing. They're a lock. They're going to come if you put on a good enough show, and if they're around. Really what you want to do is broaden that influence to people's wider circles, to their colleagues, to their family, to their friends who don't know anything about Thai boxing. And oftentimes, I would say every time I fight, some of the people who buy tickets from me have never seen Muay Thai before. They actually, as much as they are coming to support me, don't really give a shit what happens in the fight. Like they do. They're going to be like, wow, that was kind of cool.
They don't even know what they're watching half the time. They're like, oh,
yeah,
winning.
And like, that's another thing. And it's becoming like, it's taking quite a sales mentality, is that it's like, I don't think people pay enough attention to talk to the people who came to watch you fight and listen to what their takeaways were. And I have noticed they don't actually talk about the fights. They talk about, like, because I had fights where, like, I saw, I had a fight, and people wanted to come and do, because I fight in Sydney so much less now, that now it's kind of once in a blue moon when I'm fighting at home. People, let's do VIP tickets and stuff like that, and we'll chat after the fight and say, oh, how was it? And I'll go, oh, the VIP table food was pretty shit. Like, I only got sausage rolls and this, and it's like, it actually is like the fight. They're signed up to go and see a fight. Sometimes they're not particularly interested, but you want them to enjoy the fights. But there is such a, there's such a unique differentiator to watching, especially a Thai boxing fight. There's so much going on, and you ask them about the fights and they'll say, this was cool, and that guy did this, and that fight was awesome. But really the takeaways, the difference that they'll maybe come back is the experience. And that it's like, as a promoter, are you building an experience, or are you just relying on someone coming to sit down and watch their friend? And I think that's the culture build element, and that's how you can allow a fighter to build a fan base and kind of leverage their sphere of influence to start driving attendance to shows.
Yeah, it's a funny one, because the biggest thing that I have too is, like, obviously you need to sell tickets and you want the show to do well, so you've got money to do the next one. But the part that I stress most about is the venue being full. Like, I don't want people to come and watch their friend fight and then leave. So that experience element's really important, because you want people to stay till the end, regardless, because they're just having a good time. And the nights, like, I want people to come and be like, oh, it's always a good night out, like, regardless. I don't even care, who the card is, unless they're, like you said, that Muay Thai community that actually focus on the fights and the individuals. That's one thing. But the people that are outside the sport, I'd rather than be like, oh, my friend's fighting, but also, like, I've been in the show before. It's awesome. It's a really fun night out. So, like, they come and they stay the whole time. And there's like, I always pay attention to those things for sure. Like, I get a lot of feedback from people about what it is that they notice, what they like. And those are those little 1%ers that each time we just keep trying to adapt and change, just like how can we make it a little bit more of an entertainment? How do we make it a little bit more of a just a nice classy experience that people enjoy, and yeah, just have a good time and want to stick around for.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the other possibly under thought of kind of element is that when people come to watch their friend, that's their point of focus, but they're still there for the other fights. Ideally, sometimes people watch their friend and go home, but there's fights before. And one thing I've also started to take notice of is when I fight, and like a lot of the people who come don't really know the scene intricately, they will remember good performances because it's a very entertaining sport to most people. Not everyone's cup of tea, but most people who are open-minded enough to come and watch a fighter, they're there to watch fights. And you'll notice afterwards, I'll start to chat to people and they will remember fighters. Like they'll say, oh, that guy was, really entertaining, or that fight was really good. And things are takeaways. And then especially what can happen is there might be a fight in my weight class, and then down the line, I post the poster, here I'm fighting so-and-so. And those people who came to watch the fight also remember that person. And then there's that storyline has started to build that it's like, there is, I know it's pretty easy for me to say I've never promoted a show. But like there's that balance between letting people promote themselves and then also promoting the broader product to kind of expand that influence and let people start to follow the sport. And if you can start to get people in like that, that's really how, from my view anyway, how we grow things a little bit more holistically.
Yeah, there's like two pieces to this. It's interesting that you said that, because I was just thinking about it. Was a really good example is Gabrielle. So one of the things that particularly the female show and like talking to some of our sponsors, they bring their wives and their sisters and stuff, and they're all sitting at the table. And one thing that stood out to us is like quite a few of them have said, oh, my wife, she doesn't even understand the fighting thing, but she loves that Gabby girl.
Yeah.
And so it's that does, like, you do start to pay attention to that, is what vibe and energy does a particular fighter bring, because someone like Gabrielle, who comes from Canberra and that she's not bringing tickets and bums in seats, is that contributing to the experience of the show? She always puts on a good performance. She fights really beautiful style. But also there's an energy about her, she's like, she smiles, she wants to be there. She's like, she brings like an energy into the ring. And then when it's time to go, she, is like fights like, awesome. So what I'm thinking of is like, yeah, I've got sponsors that have paid good money to be there, and they're happy to see blood and all the stuff, but their wives and sisters and friends and stuff that are sitting with them, they're paying attention to things like, oh, that little tiny girl, she's so awesome, like I can't believe she gets in there and does that, and like she's just such a happy person, blah blah blah. And so I do pay attention to the energy that the fighter themselves bring on the day. If they sort of slump their way into the ring, and obviously everyone's got their own process, and you're not going to tell fighters how to how they want to walk out and all that sort of stuff, but like you do start to notice, it's like if you bring a certain energy to the show, and perhaps if you're out of town and you can't necessarily bring ticket sales, then those are things that you can still contribute. Like if you're going to put on a performance, really clearly want to be there, and you just, you're delivering an entertainment, then that's something that you're going to pay attention to and say, okay, cool, like I want to rebook that person for sure.
Yeah. Gabrielle's quite insanely popular.
Yeah, it's funny. We always talk about it. Like me
it's
and
pretty
my
nuts.
like, it's like there's a Gabrielle code to like making Muay Thai popular.
yeah, like we need Gabrielle.
Yeah, it's funny. It's a very fortunate thing that she can back it up and fights really well too.
But I think that's been a part of kind of, and we'll talk about the fights individually. I think that's been a big part of her sort of growth, especially in the last kind of year, in that like you know, it is that, well, there's the surface things that she looks like super sweet and she smiles all the way down to the ring, and it's kind of like, oh, she's gonna get in there and fight, like. But then like it's that she's got that she can flick that switch like really, really well, and of course she's a very good, I think, a good Thai boxing ambassador in that she has quite a beautiful, quite classic style. Fights very smart, like she's quite tricky to watch. But then there's also that thing is that I find her really impressive. She's got that, you know, that big social media following, and we know in for some reason in Thai boxing, we hate seeing people do well. And there's that tall poppy syndrome about she's not a real fighter. She's like an Instagram fighter, but she is like, she's just like ticks all the boxes.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's going to be everywhere where there's attention and there's popularity. Some people are always going to try to cut that down, but I think what's interesting about it is like something that with paying attention to feedback like that from the audience that aren't traditionally Thai boxing followers. A lot of our sponsors are just really good supporters of us and have come through connections, so they're not necessarily from the Thai boxing world. And so it's always really good to hear back like what they liked and who stood out to them. And what I think is interesting is like the public buy into people. It's not necessarily like they, you know, when you're really into Thai boxing, it might be a bit different because you notice if someone's got really good clinching or someone's got really good kicks or powerful hands. But the general public, they're not looking at that. So they're going to buy into characters.
Yes.
So if someone has something that stands out, or they have a certain energy about them, or they start to, like you said, they repeat, they see the same person on the show a few times, and then they're starting to buy into that person. That's what's going to build like a bit of a following.
Definitely.
And that's like when we talk about like the marketing side and the publicity side and trying to get more attention to the sport, the way I think we're best to do that is to build these characters, like showcase. We've got some really interesting fighters in this world, and no one knows about them because they're all probably a little bit scared of like promoting themselves and talking in front of the camera, and you know, that's not for everybody. But if we can help them do that and expose them a little bit and give people insights into what they do as a job, because it's like, it's even fascinating. All these people fight for fun and train every night and they treat themselves like professional athletes. They are professional athletes, but they've also got day jobs because it's not paying anyone a wage. I think the more we can like expose these people as the characters that they are and give more insights into who it is they're watching, if you don't understand all the particular technical aspects of Thai boxing, you can at least watch it and be like, that's that guy that, you know, that is a plumber or whatever, or does this, like that. You know, I saw that guy on you know, on YouTube last week, and I know this and this about them, and you buy into that like story and you buy into that person because you start to feel like you know them.
So really every Thai boxer should start their own podcast.
Yeah, why not? Everyone, it's like the thing, isn't it?
So yeah, that's actually a conversation I had with your friend and mine, Owen Rennie, when we had a business meeting last week. We have a lot of serious business meetings at Warriors of the Moncon HQ, where we were really like, he's a guy, like an incredible creative who has really just very generously lended his talents to Thai boxing. And we were talking, and he often brings this up with me. Owen Rennie, for the listeners, is Warriors of the Moncon. He's a bit shy. He prefers to be behind the lens, but like we said, has done some incredible creative projects and really works very hard just to, his whole end game is just elevating the sport. That's all he really wants to do. And his real take is that we always get together and just discuss ideas, because I think we've always got along quite well because I have a similar mentality. I try to do things where I can to give Thai boxing a little bit more of a voice. And what he really feels is that what we're missing is starting to, I think Thai boxing is following, I kind of think of it at that a little bit more, I guess, micro level, like the Australian scene and how you build that niche following. And we have people do care when there's a big fight on, and there is a bit more name value for the top fighters now, but there's a layer that we haven't really cracked as far as starting to tell the stories a bit more broadly, because there's only so many videos you can watch of fighters kicking pads. And that's not what it grows the sport, is the differentiators, not the showcase of kind of the surface level. And that's what Owen wants to do moving forward, is a little bit more start to get these guys telling their stories. Because I've been around Thai boxing for a little while now, and I'm lucky to know a lot of people I really consider elite fighters quite well. And I think about the stories leading up to some of these fights, and I'm like, that is the kind of thing that in the boxing world would be front and center on, you know, HBO or one of these UFC primetime type things, because that's what people buy into. But we don't have, I suppose, the infrastructure to tell these stories. Like, I could think of many examples off the top of my head where the broader story is fascinating, but all the end viewer is privy to is the actual fight. Like, I watched, you know, Soraya Hamami come back from having her first child to fight Kim Townsend. Like, these are crazy, just impressive feats to like manage a job as well. And like you say, people squeezing in what is a difficult professional sporting regime around their lives. And when I listen to other podcasts, I'm glad there is more examples of podcasts now, because I like to just listen in, and I hate the sound of my voice. So when I get to hear people talking about how they piece their life and how they build a life that supports Muay Thai, it's like, this is really cool. And I know Rebellion did it a little bit at one stage. You kind of watch what the guys are doing work-wise, and it's fun, and it helps you really, when you go to a show and there's 15 fights on, that's 30 fighters. You won't remember the fight that well, even though you're watching it. You might be engrossed in it at the time. But you'll remember when it's like, oh, I know that dude. He runs his own plumbing business outside of Muay Thai, and he did this and this. It's like, I think we'd love to see the sport get bigger, and we'd love to see more people kind of living off it. But the way that the sport is right now makes some of the stories really quite fascinating and really, really impressive a lot of the time. And I'd love to see people get a little bit more of a window in to how this all works in the background.
Yeah, definitely. I think the boxing example is a really good one. That's one that, like, I know on a UFC level, for me, like, I don't really watch it anymore, but when I used to, one of my favorite things was watching Embedded, you know, the week leading up to it. And I was almost more interested in that and than the actual fight. And the fights were always more exciting once you sort of had watched the series leading up, because you knew where they were coming from and how obviously it's edited, but you know how it was portrayed that their camp had been going and everything. And boxing, like, I mean, it's known in boxing that they can sell you a fight that everyone knows is not matched well. And there's a clear winner and there's a clear person that stepped in to, you know, help that A player. But they sell you the story that by the time that fight comes around, you're like, oh, who's gonna win? Like, I don't even know, and you've forgotten that it's not even a good match. And they do it really well. Like, I do pay attention a lot to a lot of things that they're doing in boxing, because they're much, as far as the marketing and the media side, they are very much more ahead of Muay Thai.
Much more mature.
Yeah, so like, the more we can do that kind of thing, I think we can give these fighters a bit more exposure that they deserve, and also hopefully help grow the sport outside of people that are just training, you know, or know Thai boxing really well.
And then that's a two-way street too, right? Because I've seen a lot of the time, if a fighter can, like, I've known people who have come to watch me fight, seen the show, and then signed up at a Muay Thai gym. So it's like, you can grow it on two sides. You can grow that niche of people who train, and that helps the sport a lot as well. Like, participation is a real driver of fanfare. Yeah,
that's it. And like, it all goes around the circle, like even sponsors, exposure, you know, hopefully we'll see that and then go, if they are in need of a certain product or whatever, then they can go to that person, or, you know, they might discover that their local professional fighter that was on that show, like, has the plumbing business, and then they need a plumber, and they, you know, go with them. Like, it's I think if we do it well, we can, like, continue, like, everyone can feed each other, and it can be a good little ecosystem.
It's that idea of building community, right? Like, we have this idea of like, Muay Thai will be bigger if it had bigger endorsements, but if you've actually have kind of experience in kind of like corporate partnerships and things like that. Even at a higher level, it doesn't work as far as you just find someone. Maybe fair play to you if you do, but it's generally not a story of you've just found someone who happens to have heaps and heaps of money and they like what you do and they just give you $1 million to run a better show. It's like, how are you driving ROI for them, and how are you building a partnership? And that's like a really good example that it's, you know, when someone gets kind of really swept up in Muay Thai, they might not have a brand that has anything to do with Muay Thai, but you start to become the go-to plumber or something like that. Like, you can, if you're playing the long game, you can drive tangible returns for people who partner with you by building a feeling of community rather than just asking for a handout.
Yeah, that's it.
But to kind of switch gears a little bit, I'm very interested to get your take on one thing in particular. So Muay Thai League kind of came out this week with a bit of a discussion on your view on developing pathways. So to step back a second to the beginning of the episode, there was talk of it was going to be a majority amateur show, designed kind of as a tool to build double doses fighters in large part. And as you get them some more amateur experience, all of a sudden you've got a bunch of professional fighters and the show kind of evolves from there. You come from an interesting Thai boxing state of beautiful Queensland, where they're playing a slightly different game to the rest of the states, to be honest, in terms of the commitment to pathways, that clear differentiator between amateur and pro. Because even we've talked about kind of how Queensland's different on here a lot, but there's not a hard, this is what constitutes an amateur fight and this is what constitutes a professional fight. It's a little bit grey and in the eyes of the promoter. Talk to me a little bit about this new pathway series, what you see it doing and kind of how it's going to look from your view.
Yeah. So obviously with moving the show more towards a professional, the female card is a little bit of a different scenario because we're all female. So, you're not going to necessarily at this point fill a completely pro show. So that format is sort of its own thing. But for the other shows, because we're pushing them into mostly an all pro show, there's that gap there that we need to fill, which is for amateur fights. One thing that I've taken from paying attention to what's happening in other states, and actually happens in America as well, that I've always sort of said, like, why don't we do that? Which is making a point of turning pro. And
yes.
So you have an amateur career, which is all about rack up the fights, get experience. It's not about your record. It's not about this or that. Like, just get the fights in and build the ring IQ, get good at fighting. Because you start off, most people start off pretty scrappy. They've got to, got to work through adrenaline dumps and nerves and all these things. Get all that out of the way as an amateur, in an amateur sort of setting, and then build yourself up to a point where, okay, you might have it like in between where you go on some bigger shows. You might still be an amateur, but you're the undercard of a bit of a bigger event, and then transition and go, okay, now I've sort of gone through the amateur circle. It's time to turn pro. I am fighting at a level where I look like a professional. Acting and treating yourself like a professional is obviously very important as well. And then that's it. Then you turn pro, and then you're only on, those professional level cards from there on in. I don't know, like, I know in America, they actually completely reset their record. So you haven't, similar to boxing, you have an amateur career and then you go back to zero and start again. Whether that will ever happen in Queensland, I don't know. But what I would like to start showcasing is particularly when we have our pro shows, is when we highlight what their records are on the tail of the tape and everything. We're actually going to split it and say, like, this, like, maybe 10 amateur fights, and then this is actually their pro record. So we can start, if you're a spectator and you're watching, particularly if you're a promoter from interstate and you're watching a Queensland pro show to find out who's around and who you might want on your card, instead of looking at a record of 10 fights, 8 wins and going, oh, they don't really fight like a 10 fight professional.
Yeah.
You can actually see, oh, hang on, it's their second pro fight. they've had 8 amateur fights. Like that makes sense. So if I'm going to match them interstate, I would match them with a 2-fight professional, person. I think some of that kind of confusion drags Queensland's level down a little bit, because someone that's had 10 to 15 fights, if the majority of them are amateur, fighting at an amateur level, then that compared to other states can look drastically different in the quality of the Muay Thai. So in with doing that and trying to fill this gap, we are going to bring in the development league actual fight shows. We're holding them in our gym. It's very amateur level, like you'll still get treated really well, but you're not getting free shorts, you're not getting all the lights and all the extra things. It'll still run like a professional run events, and everything will go smoothly, but it's a lot more low pressure. So you can just come in, have a good fight. You're fighting people equally experienced to you, probably around that 0 to 5 fight mark for adults. We can put the juniors on there as well. There's no shame in having shin pads then. Like a lot of Queenslanders don't like fighting in shin pads. And so we'll continue to make that an option. If both parties don't want shin pads, that's fine. But we can take away the like, oh, you're on this big show and you're putting shin pads on, what a pussy sort of thing. It's like it's low pressure. It's a Sunday event. It's very family friendly. If you're putting shin pads on, no one's going to judge you. And if you're putting headgear on, whatever, like it's up to the fighters to agree on what they want to do. But I think it will help bring people into the sport that were maybe otherwise not necessarily into the sport, but into fighting, that were maybe otherwise a bit too scared, because when you go to a big event, you're like, that's a lot of attention, a lot of pressure to be under those big lights and on these big cards where there's WBC titles and stuff like that. They're streaming everything as well, so it's going out to however many people. So we take all that away, then people can just be like, oh cool, I'll give it a go, like whatever, it's on a Sunday, like I got pads on, I can go to work the next day without worrying about too much damage, and they can just get involved and then see where it evolves from there, because obviously once people start fighting, they get the bug, and then hopefully we can develop more people through that way.
Definitely. And I think that's probably, I remember this coming up. I was a guest on the Rebellion podcast, and one of the things that came up was, we were discussing, this was in the early stage. So for those unaware listening, New South Wales and Victoria, the system that Nakia has just described, that they're kind of going to put in on their own accord, is formalized. This is how the padding looks like for your first 5. This is what it looks like for your second, however many you're a D class, C class, B class, and then as a professional A class, like a structured pathway. When we discussed it, this was when Victoria had just introduced that. And one of the points that we made was, a big difference in boxing is starting out as an amateur fighter in boxing does not imply that your intention is to eventually be a high level professional. Whereas the lack of pathways in Muay Thai, it's kind of like, if you're starting out, you're really giving it a go. Like, you're going to be on commercial shows, you're expected to sell some tickets. And as you mentioned, that will lock people out, because people will say, oh, look, I don't want that kind of experience. I just wanted to sort of test myself. And that, I think, is a really good step forward across the states. And even gyms are starting to do it, where they'll be like, okay, you want to have a little bit of competitive experience, do our in-house sparring day. And the more you let people test the waters, the more people will eventually participate, because there's a hill to climb getting to that first fight place. And people have bad experiences because I've seen people, like, New South Wales is really on the right track now, but I was first getting involved over a decade ago, and I did see people starting out on a show that really didn't suit. And there's also that idea of, some people are bucket listers, and there's nothing wrong with being a bucket lister. If you fall in love with the sport and you just want to do it to say you did it, or not, that's not even a good way to word it. You want to just challenge yourself to do it once. Amazing. Let's set that up. But what becomes a problem is when a prospective professional fights a bucket lister. That's not the kind of matches that we want to make. And you'd see it on commercial shows with no shin guards in a pub. That is just we grow the sport also by allowing people to have good experiences. If someone can step into an amateur fight and win, lose, draw, be like, that was sick, that's ideal, rather than like, oh, I got thrown into this fight and I really took a knock. And people don't want to come back to the gym then and don't really want to continue to be a part of the community. To me, that's like the more time I spend in Muay Thai, that's the worst case scenario. If someone comes out of a first time fight, like, I don't want to even be involved anymore. What a bad idea that was.
Yeah, one of the biggest things I know from my personal experience and a lot of people I speak to and dealing with fighters as well is like getting started. Like one of the biggest hangups is the fear of judgment that people have.
Yes.
So it's like, man, like what if I go and trip over the ropes getting into the ring? It starts there. It's not even the fight. And then it's like,
I can tell you it's not the end of the world.
Yeah. What if I get hurt really badly? What if I just get beaten up real, like just, someone puts a clinic on me? What if I get knocked out? Obviously, once you go through some of these things, you realize it's not as big of a deal and this is the fight game, but that's a very scary thing to overcome. And then you add, the fight posters, the social media, the streaming, the lights, the crowd, the pressure to sell tickets, the pressure from your coaches as well, because even your coach is going to put a different level of pressure on you when you're on a 1774 versus when you're on a Muay Thai Vic amateur day. So like the level of which you expect your fighters to train. I know traditionally Thai boxing gyms are going to expect their fighters to train pretty hard across the board. But if you are someone that just maybe you're starting a bit later and you're a bit older, or you are someone that maybe your work doesn't permit you to train like a professional or whatever, and you do want to just give it a go, or you're not sure where you are in your journey, maybe you've been training for 6 months and you want to give it a crack to see if you want to take this into something bigger, then you can, like your coach would probably assert the pressure onto you according to that event. So if you can have a low key Sunday against somebody else who's in a similar boat, because you match, like you said, you do match accordingly. You're not going to match someone that's got a really promising career. Maybe match them with someone that's in a similar, maybe been training under a year, or in a, like you can dig a little bit deeper into the matches. And then that coach can say, cool, we're going to train you, but like, I want you to train, maybe 4 really good days a week. Like your lifestyle doesn't permit you to do the 6 days like a professionals. Like, cool, you can do it at a bit different of a level. And then when it's time, like, you'll find these gems obviously through that are, okay, cool, I'm ready, I'm committed now, I loved it, I want to take it to the next level. Let's up the training, let's up the requirements. The pressure will become a little bit more according to the level that they're at in their journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And another question I was keen to get into is, so as discussed, that kind of structure is now fixed in New South Wales, in Victoria. South Australia is the same, but the participation's a little bit lower, so they will generally travel to the other states. Like Pinky's bringing his guys to Muay Vic. WA's kind of in this way. It's a little bit different, but have had a similar structure for quite a long time, as far as you've got to get certain number of fight super pads. I don't know if it'll ever be the way in Queensland, to be honest. So it's not backed by, like, not everyone's bought into this kind of system. So for you promoting it, you might not have any insight yet, but how do you feel? Are people playing along? Are you getting people involved here, or what's that like?
Like I'm on the fence about whether, change is always a scary thing. And whether combat sports came in and actually structured everything. Some days I say, I think it's a really good thing, it's needed. And then some days I'm like, oh, we might be careful about what we wish for. Maybe it'll be a lot, because I know that, it's a drama for promoters and stuff dealing with all the regulations. So we are fortunate in some ways. But so when I first put the post up and said, like, look, this might be unpopular opinion, this is how I think we should start developing people on the entry level, I thought I might get a bit of kickback about it. And there might be, they're probably silent about it, but I was surprised in the amount of support we got as well. Like Benj and I instantly got a lot of messages saying, oh, great, I've got fighters ready for you. They're just not ready for Muay Thai League, the big show. But so I haven't been giving you nominations because that show's too big, but I've got people for that. So like, let me know when the next one is, you can have my list. So there's people out there waiting to fight. They're just trying to find the right pathway for them. And obviously these trainers are aware that the guys that they've got aren't ready for the big leagues yet. So I think we'll actually, it's not going to be for everyone, and that's fine. There's so many fighters in Queensland active and ready to go, and new people coming through. Our gym alone has a huge pool of people that are wanting to give it a go. So I think we're going to have no problems filling the cards. We've got one next weekend, which is a mixture of juniors and adults. We hadn't announced that we were going to do this. We just sort of started booking this card, and it was January 22nd. People were like, mate, you're not going to get anyone in January. Everyone's still on holidays. Everyone's not, in shape. And we've got 20 fights on the card.
That's sick.
So so I think there's people out there. And I kind of know when Benj and I first opened the gym, we weren't experienced gym owners yet. We weren't experienced trainers. So the fighters we were developing at that time, now that I look back, they were developing to the level that we were at. And there is absolutely no way that one of our fighters at that stage could go on a Muay Thai League or a 1774 or a Rebellion. Like, it just would have been like a joke, they just weren't fighting at that level. And there were a couple of shows around at the time that were very entry level shows that were run in gyms, and that's the ones we chose because we just were aware that that's the skill level we were at as a fresh gym with fresh fighters, and we were learning the ropes a lot ourselves. So we were throwing them into very amateur level competition and giving them a go, and we would win some fights and lose some fights. And as that's developed, now the gym's been open for 7 years. Obviously, we've got people that can fight at the top level. And if you don't have that, slowly what we noticed in Queensland is that started to disappear. So when we'd bring a new fighter through who was very green, maybe a little bit Gumby, didn't know, like very, very nervous as well. Like maybe we didn't know how they're going to handle the pressure. We're like, what show do we put them on? Because everyone's got streams, everyone's got all these title fights now, like they've all got this stuff. And I'm like, man, what happened to the entry level shows that we can just throw our guy on and see how he goes?
And even just putting someone in a fight where there's no padding is often the case in Queensland. Like, if you're 50-50 about whether they really should be fighting at all, like, I think sometimes people don't realize like the level of responsibility, like that person's health is on the line. If you're like, it might be okay, let's see how he goes, and you throw him into a fight at a pretty swish venue, no padding, against someone who's kind of not so 50-50, someone who's a little bit more sure of themselves, you can badly hurt them, and they've got to go to work on Monday. Yep,
that's it. And yeah, just that kind of scene just sort of disappeared after a while. I think everyone just wants to be the biggest show, and so the competition to hold the most titles and have the best belts and this and all that just sort of became the thing where it's like, oh, well, what happened to that entry level point? Like that just disappeared. And they're still, putting debut fighters on these shows, but then once again, I feel like that's dragging Queensland's down a little bit, because if you're tuning into a stream and the first 5 fights are, 1 to 3 fight people or 0 to 3 fights, and they're scrappy and they're messy and they've got no pads on and they're fighting full Thai rules, some of them as well. Or you don't even know, sometimes they're just fighting Muay Thai, but you don't actually realize they're not throwing elbows because it looks the same. And so you're like, hang on a second, is this a professional fight? Like, what's going on? These guys are terrible. They look like first timers. And until it gets clarified by the commentators, you're not really sure what's going on. And then it's no wonder if people are tuning in and going, well, man, is this what Queensland's producing? Like, geez.
Yeah, not the kind of experience that would make an uninitiated crowd member come back.
Yeah. And then I think, it just leaves question as far as like where Queensland's at on a national level. But it's just like, no, these guys are just first time fighters that you just usually on an interstate show, you wouldn't see that on the stream. So I don't know. I think it's not, like I said, it's not going to be for everyone, and people don't have to support it, but those that do and like the pathway and like the idea of progressing fighters into it at the level that they're at, then we're all in.
Awesome. And here's an interesting question I have for you as well. for kind of the level of show you've started to put together with Muay Thai League, it definitely is a premier kind of Australian show. I find as a promoter, I think the point of difficulty is you want to put on, like, you put on some big international fights, like Ellis and Pentai and these kind of events that are world class. How do you strike that balance between wanting to, on your own, put on an international quality show, while also kind of recognizing fighters want to use you as kind of the springboard to something? All the fighters want to go to one championship, want to go to those world level international shows. And there can be that, I guess, difficulty in how much you invest in a fighter when really their best case scenario is they fight for you once and they get the message that, hey, come over to Singapore and fight in the cage. Is that like a consideration? Like, how do you, so we've talked the pathway from novice to Muay Thai League. Where do you kind of see Muay Thai League sitting as kind of a pathway to, what's the pathway beyond there, and kind of what's ideal as a promoter in terms of building a talent that then gets recognized overseas?
Yeah, we actually had like a lot of brainstorming happening and meetings and things at the end of the year about where we want to take this and what's ideal to us, like long term and just in the next few years. And as much as I'd like to be like, we will be one championship, it's a very lovely dream. When we actually did a lot of market research and dug into, infusion, lion fight, like even the way the UFC has been built, the way one's being built, and it's like they like you actually mentioned earlier, it would be a nice dream, and that it's actually some of these really big shows are just had an investor with millions and millions of dollars, or they venture capital sort of way, and that's how they are just like complete, just beyond this world. So on the level of where we're actually at, as far as building a traditional small business and not having venture capitalists and all that sort of stuff, to be one of the top dogs in Australia is our goal. Mm-hmm. And we want people to know that when you fight on Muay Thai League, you will get springboarded to international. So some promoters in the whether it's in the US or Canada or one championship or whatever, in the UK, like they're going to watch and they're going to be like, hey, there's that guy that you've been promoting. I see he can, back it up. He fights really well. We want him over here. Even if on the Japan circuit as well, like for us to be the gateway or the one of the platforms that people see to get there, like great. Like that's building Australian Muay Thai, that's building the athletes, that's all we could ever ask for. So yeah, that's definitely one of the things. Even on an interim level, like obviously we're not there yet. Well, I don't believe we're there yet. I think we will be. I'm pretty confident in where we're going with this business. But in the interim as well, like I would like the promoters interstate to be like, if I want Queensland talent, I should watch Muay Thai League because they're going to put on the good Queensland fighters. Yeah. And so like, hint, hint, Sai, if you watch this, there would be nothing more that I would like to be to a point where I know Sai goes, I want to start getting some Queensland talent. I don't have time to watch all the shows and pay attention to all the Queensland fights, especially with there being so many. I'm going to watch Muay Thai League and I'm going to pull the ones that I like out of that and contact them. That's how you get a rebellion. So yeah, like I know it's obviously most Australian fighters' dream is to end up on rebellion at some stage. I don't think Queenslanders get enough of that, probably because of, the enormous pool of fighters we have, and it gets diluted as far as which ones are the real standouts. Yeah, there's a lot to wade through when you're like, oh, there's this Queensland guy and he's got 29 fights, and you're watching fights, like, okay, 19 of them were when he was 13 at the national championships. It's like it's a bit of digging to match a fair fight interstate sometimes. Yeah, unless you have time to watch every fight, and you just don't, like it's hard to navigate through. I've spoken to Sai about certain fighters, and he said, oh yeah, that person was nominated or whatever, and I looked him up and there's just no way, they just get killed by these guys. Like, so like interim wise, that would be a huge goal of mine, would be to be the show in Queensland that people watch to know who to put on. And then, yeah, ideally international. Like, there'd be nothing that would make me happier than to know that we are part of the reason that people get launched overseas.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a really good kind of mentality to take. I like to hear that. And on that note, like we discussed during the week, kind of a model that you're adopting in terms of kind of taking on focused Muay Thai League sort of signed fighters. Give me a little bit of insight into what you're doing with that and what the news is there.
Yeah, so this year we've definitely got a few like sort of collaborations in mind. On a promotional level, we are collaborating and teaming up with Warriors of the Mongkong. And like you said before, the goals and the values align really well there, as far as we need to build these athletes up. We need to get them more exposure, tell their stories as well. And yeah, like you said, there's no one better than Owen behind the camera. Like, he's just super talented. So as far as interstate goes, he'll be able to help us with that, which is amazing. And then on a Queensland level, as far as the media side goes, we already utilize Lachlan from Combat Analytics. He's our photographer and videographer.
Yeah, he's really good.
And yeah, he's amazing too. He's got lots of experience he works with Ace Boxing. So he's got heaps of insight into what they're doing in the boxing world, which is, it's really handy for us to sort of see what they're doing over there and how we can adapt that to Muay Thai. And so that's a big part, is that we want to find a few key fighters that we can focus on, have them fight on our shows and tell their stories like throughout the year, instead of just in one episode, you know, of Inside MTL leading up to their fight, but rather actually slowly drip feed, release more of their story throughout the entire year.
Yep.
So you're hearing it here first, but the person that the first person that we've going to be doing this with is Brandon Spain in 2023, which is exciting.
A fine choice.
Yes. There's no doubt that he is a superstar, you know, and he's just one of those people, I think, like, everybody knows he walks the walk, and when he gets in the ring, it's a war, and he always puts on a performance, and that's great. But who's Brandon Spain, the person? Like, who's, you know, why is he already not constantly overseas? Why, like, I think he's just like, he's underrated, like not even, I don't even think he's underrated on an Australian level, but on an international level, there should be far more exposure for him. And so, yeah, we're just kind of partnering up with Brandon and Leon and hoping that we can give him a bit more exposure and see if we can help him sort of skyrocket off to where, you know, the goals that he wants to go in his career.
Awesome. And what's that going to look like from your perspective in terms of, will you have a hand in kind of matching his fights elsewhere in Australia, or it's just a matter of you're going to lock him in for your shows? Kind of, are you taking kind of a broader role in where he gets into state fights, or how does that all come together?
No, yeah. So he's going to be fighting on our 2 shows that we've got, and then we will do some media coverage of him throughout the entire year. And if he fights on other shows in between, then he's free to do that. So Leon will still manage his fights like normal. And obviously they know that there's a window that obviously, like, every fighter has a sort of a window of not booking fights too close together. So if he gets fights on other cards in between ours, then great, like, that's good. We will still actually follow his journey. If it's somewhere we can go and film and be part of, like, that night as well, we will.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, we have no interest in like signing a fighter and locking them up so that they can't fight elsewhere and they're only ours. And like, that's I've heard of people doing that before, and it just feels really yuck to me. So definitely not interested. And we don't have, like, you know, that might be a different story if we had 4 or 5 shows a year and you could guarantee this fighter, like, I can have you 5 fights this year. Cool. That might be really beneficial to them. But we only have 2 that he can be on. So what he does in between, like, hopefully he wants to, stay active and get some fights, and we'll continue to follow that journey, which would be cool because, like, these other promotions will benefit from that too, because we'll constantly be exposing him and giving him media and continuing to follow his journey through those fight camps. So they kind of get a bit of free marketing out of it, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. A fantastic choice. Super entertaining fighter. A guy I think has had some bad luck in terms of activity level, but he's poised. There's like I chatted to him, what appears to be a week ago for the last episode. And yeah, we went over some of the matchups. There's some huge fights for him in Australia. That division's actually quite hot at the moment. So yeah, I think with that kind of backing, it's going to be a big year for him.
Yeah, it's definitely just a timing game with getting him those fights. It's like it's all got to line up, and I know many people have talked about this before, but it's one thing that I think on the outside surface is that people don't realize. Promoters realize it and trainers realize it, but maybe the fans don't see that side of it. Is like, especially with titles, like you kind of have to be in the right place at the right time. With the right promoter willing to put it on, the opponent happens to be ready and available. There's so many factors that go into it. I know as a fighter, like when I was a fighter, I sometimes would see a title get announced, like specifically WBC, which is obviously the one people are really watching. And I'd go, they're not the best two in Australia at that weight.
Yeah.
Why are they fighting for it? Like that doesn't make any sense. And I didn't really have the insight and didn't understand that, well, the two best, maybe one of them wasn't available or was injured or was booked on another show already, or like there's all these factors that play into it. And I think unfortunately that's sort of what's happened with Brandon's story a little bit. And hopefully those fights people want to see, we can like get them happening. I hope towards the end of the year for our September show, we hope to have him a bit of an international opponent. Cool. We've already got a big one in mind, so fingers crossed it all lines up, but it would be a big one. It would be very exciting.
Love it. I'll be following that closely. And just to switch gears a little bit, because I did want to get into this, but before we wrap up, first question, and I know you've got another guest spot scheduled on the Female Fight Experience, and I'm conscious that a lot of things to do with the upcoming show. I think that's probably a better place to discuss. So I'll leave a bit of it, but I do want to get and I want to hear that. I do want to get your thoughts on. So the next show is A League of Their Own, a all-female sort of, I guess. I mean, it's still the Muay Thai League show, but it's like a specialty Muay Thai League once a year. A League of Their Own.
Yep.
Yeah.
Once a year,
all female. The first show of its kind, if I'm not mistaken, since Dynamite Naksu. Or the first kind of repeat. There might have been individual examples. So talk to me, if you will, about how that's come together, what the vision there was, and what's the aim for that branch of Muay Thai League.
Yeah, so first one was like, we'll do one, and then that might be it. We'll just see what happens. Who knows how many females there are that are available and ready to fight. And I did know I was aware that there was a lot, because my other cards, if I wanted to, I could almost make them 80% females. So I was like, there's definitely a lot there. So the plan initially was just one and done. And then once we did it, and it was just such a special kind of energy and really cool for the sport, and it gave us a little bit of a unique point. We thought for sure I'll do it again, and we'll keep this, we'll make this an annual thing. One thing it's a funny thing, actually, it conveniently works out for the calendar to start the year off that way as well, because the girls are just like, I think because it's a unique thing and it's not something you can do throughout the whole year. Training and being in a fight camp over Christmas is totally doable if you know you're getting a chance to be on the all-female card, only one in Australia of the year. Whereas I think if we were kicking February is very soon, like off the start of the year, and I think if we were starting with a mixed card, March gets really hectic too for Queensland. So I think we'd probably be fighting a little bit for trying to fill a card. So it just does, it times up well. And the girls are just keen and ready. And it's exciting. It's interesting. This one will be interesting for me. Obviously, I fought on the last one, so I was experiencing it from a bit of a different perspective. So a
lunatic's perspective, promoting your own fight,
really. But definitely just don't recommend that. I wouldn't do that again.
Wouldn't even try it.
But no, most people wouldn't. It's weird. But definitely excited about being sort of more hands-on with this one and behind the scenes a bit more. But we've built a good card, and the actual struggle that I've had behind the scenes for this one has been Queensland females that are racking up experience is lacking a little bit. So keeps coming through on the entry point, and up to about 5-6 fights, and then it just really gets thin. So my top end of the card is very much quite a few interstate talent. And what makes me nervous about that is I just really hope people stick around. And even if you don't know this fighter, these are really good fights. I've matched them. I know they're good fights.
They are great fights.
There's a really good amount of interstate girls out there, and I'm hoping that the crowd stick around to enjoy those fights as well, even though they're not necessarily from the local grounds.
Absolutely. And speaking of great fights, I thought it might be a cool way to kind of preview the show would be if we just do a little bit of a run through of some of the top fights, get your thoughts. I've got some thoughts too, and just give people a little bit of what they can look forward to. So we'll have a look at kind of your top 4 announced fights, those kind of marquee professional bouts, and we'll work down from the top of the card. So headlining on the night is Jessie Gill versus Zoe Paturak for the WBC Super Lightweight National title. Zoe, of course, already the
welterweight.
I forget the names of the divisions, but already the welterweight national champion. That's not actually her weight class, so she's coming down to her preferred weight. She stepped up to fight Steph Glue for the title, which is a tall order on its own. She'll relinquish that belt to shoot for the title in her preferred weight against Jessie Gill. What are your thoughts on this one? I think I've personally have known Zoe for years and years and years. Jessie, I'm a little bit less familiar with. Talk to me about how this match came together. What can we expect from it?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Jessie has spent a lot of her career at 69 kilos, around 67, 69 as well. Way too heavy for her. Like, she just has taken fights at whatever's been available. So making 63 is quite easy for her, but just hasn't had the opportunity. Like Zoe's a very popular fighter. Everyone, quite a lot of people know who she is. She's been on the circuit for a long time, and
been around a long time. Well accomplished as well. Was winning the IFMA Worlds as a junior and as a senior. Yeah, she's been around the block certainly.
Yeah, so no doubt that she's top dog in Australia. But what's interesting about Jessie is it's kind of the interesting thing is like she's very underrated. Like pretty top teen who she trains out under Paul Hosking. They're in Cairns, and North Queensland's really like come through in the last sort of 12, 18 months. But previously North Queensland was quite quiet. They've just sort of stayed quiet, kept to themselves, but and just as a result been like miss big exposure opportunities. She had a good breakthrough moment on Muay Thai Grand Prix for her last fight, which then people went, oh, who's this girl? Hang on a second. But she's actually 19 fights, 17 wins. So she has
impressive record. Yeah, it's a lot of experience.
She has they both sent me photos of them like this with their belts. They both cover their arms and bodies in belts. So they've a lot of hard work. Yeah, they've done Zoe, I think, had that little bit more exposure. Still not enough for her accolades, for sure. Yeah. But what I think is interesting is, if you're not a local in Queensland, you definitely probably don't know who Jessie is. And that could be easy to just pass her over, but it's just purely because she unfortunately hasn't had the exposure that she realistically deserves. But she's got the resume, so it should be a good fight.
And it's definitely a good fight to potentially kind of gain that exposure. It would be a big scalp to take if she could knock Zoe Paturak off her perch. Yeah.
Yeah, hard task. I think anyone knows if they're going to fight Zoe, that's a hard task. So it'd be interesting.
Yeah, great fight. Absolutely, and a worthy national title. Speaking of national titles, this one we've spoken briefly about this one before. I'm keen to talk. This was the fight that I think this match was announced before the main, possibly, and I actually bought my flights when this fight was announced. So the fight that, well, I wanted to come to a Muay Thai League anyway, but if you needed to give me a reason, you did. WBC super flyweight national title. Like, this matchup is, like, I find really, like, even just talking about it, I'm really excited to see it. Davina Martin from Muay versus Kiri Bradley.
Yes, that is an exciting one. It's kind of like new blood versus like seasoned veteran. Like, Kiri's been around forever. She's fought everybody. And you know, we're talking Yolanda and Kim Townsend, like, she's fought the top, and Brooke Farrell, like, all top, like, high, even up 3 weight classes than normal. And yeah, there's people, no female Muay Thai should know who Kiri is for sure. And then you've got Davina, who just sort of in the last year, 18 months, has sort of just quietly just exploded.
Yeah, she's so good.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, really, you put it well, has just really, I think maybe where that kind of trajectory became sort of explosive was the Som Surat fight.
Yeah.
At the end of.
She was a big underdog in that one, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was. Yeah. And I think that was maybe a similar scenario to some of the ones you described. I think it was like she was just had that little bit less exposure, and it was kind of, you know, there was betting odds for that fight. She was literally a significant underdog, and a lot of people thought maybe it was too much of a step up, but handled herself absolutely beautifully in that fight, and has continued to kind of step up since. And it's even recently went overseas. She went over to Mexico to fight, so starting to rack up that international experience. What do you think it would do for her career to get a win over Kiri Bradley if she can pull it off?
Yeah, I think for either of them, it's going to be really good, because, I mean, ultimately they're going to have the national title around their waist, and sort of cement their place in that division as the top in Australia. And I think this is actually one, fortunately, where we do have 2 of the best in the country at that weight. Like, this is,
yeah, no doubt.
Hasn't been like, oh yeah, there's maybe another 1 or 2 that sort of belong there but weren't available. Like, these 2, I approached Kieran about this at War on the Shore last year. So whenever that was a long time ago. And I
July.
Was like, yeah. So in my head, I was like, Kiri Davina needs to happen. Like, that was obviously the weight class I belonged in. So I was always very aware of who's in that weight class, and it's always just been one that I know all the fighters in. And I was just like, no doubt. And one thing I actually really like about this match is at 52 kilos, and this is 2 girls that can fight at 50 as well. They're quite small, but they're both power hitters.
Yeah.
Davina, you only have to see her warm up out the back and hit pads and hear the crack of the pads to know how hard she hit. I've fought Kiri, and I know she for a fact, like, Kim fought her twice, and it was like the biggest thing is like Kiri hits hard, and she's quite strong as well. Like, she's quite, when she does lock in the clinch, she like can really hold on. She is quite a strong fighter. And just the fact she's fought up to 55 kilos when she's like walks around light, you know, just goes to show the level of strength that she has. And yeah, like oh man, I'm excited. Like, it's just a good fight.
I'm really excited for this one.
Like different styles. Like, it's just going to be who's going to pull it out on the night.
Yeah, I really think this is, I don't know, there's some good fights here, but this is like my sort of, like, when I look at the style match, of course, like Davina, a very good friend of mine, Kiri, also very friendly with, and have been watching fight for like so long. It's one of those fights that when you so closely understand, like, you've got so much experience watching their fights play out, have seen so much of their careers up close, that it's like, I just really think the way they match up is like absolutely sick. I'm super excited for this fight.
What's cool about this division too is there's quite a lot of like international like opponents for them. So whoever wins realistically has, like, there's a fair whacker list of people at that around that 50 to 52 internationally that are from the UK or are based in Thailand that are like accessible. So possible international or world titles in the future is definitely not something that's impossible. You know, whoever wins is going to have some great opportunities there.
Yeah, and that's part of the excitement I feel in this fight for like where both girls are at, that it's like there's the match itself and there's what awaits the winner. I think that's really coming into 2023. I think that's kind of on my list of fights to watch as far as like the broader context is concerned.
Yeah, exciting.
Next on the ticket, this is a good one. So this is another example of someone I'm quite closely familiar with versus someone who's a little bit more of an unknown to myself. Dory Duncan from SRG versus Melinda Dawley. What can you tell me about this match?
This is a styles make fights one, I think, which is exciting. Surprisingly, Melinda, she's had 7 fights like in total. This is her second pro fight, and I get no's to match her like a lot. Like people, no, my fighter's not ready. Like same experience and stuff. People just aren't keen to fight her. I think her fight name might be Pocket Rocket, which makes perfect sense. She's like quick, fast. Her gym traditionally have like a Dutch kickboxing style, so really good leg kicks, good hand and leg kick combos. And she's just game, like she's just in there to fight. She's like quite small in stature, but like she's Pocket Rocket's like a good way to to explain. And then Dory, obviously typical SRG.
Absolutely not a Dutch kickboxing style.
No, not Dutch kickboxing style at all. So it'll be exciting because I've seen both of them execute their game plans really well. And I can't see either of them falling into each other's traps. So it's going to come down to what's going to be more effective.
Yeah, Dory is a hot commodity at present. She really, I think, turned some heads over the years, has racked up experience somewhat sporadically. I feel like across her amateur career, it would sort of be she'd fight and then she'd kind of vanish for a while and come back, but racked up a couple of her last amateur fights and her early pro fights in quick succession, starting to go that more SRG way. And in particular, I think it's 2 pro fights for her now, was very, very impressive in both of those. And one on jumps. I think where I became a lot more familiar with Dory was I commentated a bunch of her fights last year, and that's kind of the most engaged way, I guess, to watch someone fight, bar maybe refereeing. And I was kind of like, I remember the first time I was always aware of her name, but the first time I watched her fight when I commentated the SRG show, I was kind of like, oh shit, who's this? And her first pro fight was a big one. Just watching her, she fought a girl from Strongheart, and just her right kick is an absolute thing of beauty. And I think what is the real hill to climb fighting Dory is just like her physical presence. She's like, she takes her strength and conditioning very seriously. She's a very impressive athlete, like a real power fighter, and is also like quite big and quite solid for the weight. Like a really, really stiff test for anyone at this weight range, and a serious power with a good pressure style and real finishing ability. That was like, a sweet cut stoppage on the last 1774. I think this is going to be a wild fight. Yeah,
I think it's definitely going to be a good one. And it's like the girls from Skadi, if you ever match with them, you're in for a fight. Like they're always really tough. They're male and female gym now, but they were predominantly an all-female gym.
Okay, interesting.
Female owner, female trainer, and so that just naturally is how it was, and now it's sort of evolved, and they've got guys fighting out of there as well now. But there's a really cool vibe that comes from anyone that fights out of that gym. Like they're always on, they bring their game, they're really good at biting down and just going for it, but with technique as well. So like they don't just just brawl and scrap around, but they're going to be quick and active, being willing to be on the front foot, but maintaining good composure as well. So we've worked with Luis from the very first MTL. He's always been a really good supporter of us and sort of believed in us when we didn't have any proof that we were going to do a good job. And
good guy, Luis.
Yeah, he's a really good guy and really, really good trainer. And I've actually said this to Dory, like she's very, very lucky to have a trainer like him that sort of really does look out for them at the level they're at and the progression that they're at. And he's he knows who Melinda is because he's seen her fight on the show before, and he knows like it's going to be a challenge, and is excited to test Dory and with a different style. And yeah, I think it just has all the makeups for a good fight. I don't think the crowd is going to be disappointed by this one at all.
Definitely. And bring us home. Let's talk about this one. Something we've already spoken about on this episode. Emerging superstar Ramos versus Caitlin Vance.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. Fortunately enough, this is another one that I was lucky enough to be pretty aware of who was in the division. Caitlin typically has fought at 50 to 52. Now,
I was thinking that when this was announced, because if I'm not mistaken, the last match for the aforementioned Kiri Bradley was Caitlin Vance, and I don't think of Davina and Gabrielle as the same weight. So that was an interesting one for me.
So what's funny is if you don't know Caitlin personally, you wouldn't know, but she just walks around really light and fights up because she just can't get fights. Everyone knows mini flyweight's a fairly thin division, and even that light flyweight, that's 48.9, I think it is. It's
just
a very
obscenely small people.
Yeah, Caitlin's been around for a long time. She's fought Kim Townsend, I think 3 times.
Yeah.
And I've actually fought her at 52, and she weighed in, I think, at 50, like with clothes on.
Soaking wet,
she
brick in her pocket.
She just takes the fights because she can, and she's just willing to fight. But actually, I have her on my Facebook and everything, like we're friends, and I saw that on her fight with Kiri, she woke up on the day of weigh-in and weighed herself, and she was 48 kilos. So she went and ate and tried to beef herself up to make to get closer to the 51 weight that they were fighting at.
That's not a problem I have.
No, definitely not. I would have liked to have that problem a little bit more in my career, but I would probably fight day be crying because I've still got weight to lose. But so like she just has, I think, been passed over because people have just been unaware really that she's actually quite small. And so I messaged her and I was like, hang on, 48. If you're waking up on fight day at 48, you can make 47.6 or whatever it is. So yeah, I was like, can you make that weight? She was like, yeah, no problem. So but I was excited. And I think it'll be a good test for Gabrielle because like Caitlin's she's over 35 experience. Like she's got a bunch of fights.
And Gabrielle's kind of in that spot where she's very much emerged as one of the top girls in a weight where there's no kind of middle ground. Like she fought Lucy Deadman in like her 4th fight or something. Where there was her first, even probably, she'd only had amateur fights in New South Wales and stepped up to fight Lucy, and then has a couple more fights. And so it's kind of difficult if you really want to rack up the experience. You can't be selective, and this is a good example of that. Will be interesting to see for Caitlin what it's like to constantly be fighting heavy and finally get that opportunity to fight at a more natural weight. There's a real strength that comes from getting used to fighting girls that are much bigger than you, and also you've got to be the crafty one when you're a little bit smaller. So, and then when you kind of even up the weights a little bit, that's kind of where the benefit of that can start to show. So definitely an interesting test for Gabrielle.
Yeah, Caitlin's very aggressive, also a fairly decent puncher, and likes to just come forward and throw, and then obviously Gabrielle's got that crafty footwork, so it's going to be another one where it's it's conflicting styles. I think it is going to be an interesting. I think Caitlin probably quite enjoy getting to fight at the weight she belongs, which will be nice. What's cool about this is Gabrielle's had, it was 10 fights or something. It's not,
if that, crazy.
Yeah. And racked most of those up last year. Having a busy year. Caitlin's season, been around for a long time, over 30 fights, fought all the sort of top dogs. I think she was WMC Australian champ at one point, years ago. And booking this fight was a text message to Kieran to say Gabrielle versus Caitlin, and he said, can she make that weight? Yes. Okay, booked. There's
difficult negotiation.
Yeah, really difficult. And it's that would sometimes be a lot harder, but like you said, because that weight division doesn't have the opportunity, Gabrielle's just had to constantly have that attitude of, and Kieran obviously on her behalf, take what you can, fight whoever you can, who cares, just go for it. And so she's fought up and experienced quite a bit, and it just is what it is. And that's realistically how fighters in weight divisions like that really do need to look at it.
Yeah, and what an opportunity for like Muay on just such a crazy rise, and could be another really huge night in kind of cementing their place. I mean, they've got the potential to if they are able to take home 2 wins here, that's a massive statement for where specifically there are female fight teams at.
Yeah, the belt we've got coming to is pink, which is really cool.
That's nice.
That's a nice little thing. But
Nice,
I actually asked the guy to make it smaller because I was like, these girls are 47 kilos. Like, can you make it so but he didn't. So
He didn't.
like, yep.
He respectfully declined.
That's cool.
It's like a funny consideration in titles. Like I still remember when Lucy Dedman won the Destiny title. It's like that belt is the same size as you.
Yeah, it's gonna. Yeah, I'll have to add some extra clips or something on it.
just buckle it up extra tight.
Yeah.
Okay, so an absolutely fantastic fight show coming up, and no doubt a massive year on the way for NTL more broadly. An incredible gift to me, putting the show on my actual birthday. Looking forward to being in the house for it. Is there any kind of parting message, anyone you wanted to give a shout to before we wrap up here?
No. I mean, this female show is presented largely by Total Steel Australia, so they've like signed on to continue to support the female card for however long we run it, which is amazing. So that's been a huge help, obviously, to get this thing off the ground. As far as the female card goes, like, man, like everyone we've worked with and matched and has sort of come to the party as far as like amateurs being willing to self-fund themselves just to get opportunity to be on the card. And it's very, very special being able to hold this event and everyone sort of coming to the plate and making it happen. So yeah, I'm really excited for the show to be a good one. And I hope, lots of people tune in. We've got heaps of new live stream sort of stuff. So if you're interstate and you're tuning into the live stream, you can be hopefully, and I would love to hear people's feedback on next level in production. So hopefully it's a good viewing experience. And if not, and you're in your local and you come into the event, please do, and please stick around and watch the whole card, because these girls absolutely train their butts off, and I know they're willing to put on a good show. So hopefully people come and support, and should be a good night.
And absolutely, if you're able to make it, be in the house for this one. I think it's an absolutely sick card. I'm crazy excited for it. Come say hi to me if you're around.
Say happy birthday.
If you want. Well, I mean, like, there's going to be a big podcast attendance. Maybe there's going to be a big podcast attendance at this one, right? You can hang out with the female fight experience too. So really, it's going to be the place to be.
Yeah, if you're an emerging fighter and you want to be on a podcast, you've got to rub shoulders with the right people. So yeah,
absolutely, you do. You've got to come say hi. But yeah, if you're able, come to the show, come say hi to me, or don't. Like, that's definitely not a selling point. But if you want to say hi to me, you can. But if you want to stay away from me, you can too. For everyone else, if you're interstate, get on the live stream. I know MTL are doing huge things to really up that production value, so that's going to be sick. I'll watch the live stream when I go home. I'll watch the whole thing twice. For everyone else, thank you very much for listening in again. Let us know what you want to hear from us. We've got a ton of cool guests in the works. Give me a shout on Instagram. Been talking a lot to sort of just listening to the show lately, getting some good feedback, and I appreciate all of it. So message Combat Chat, message me personally, always happy to talk. If you're here, if you've stuck on this long, please subscribe on YouTube, follow on Instagram at Combat Chat Podcast for both. Chuck us 5 stars on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. It is a great help, and we look forward to talking again soon. Take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you.